Good afternoon and welcome everybody. I'm Scott Earnest, Associate Director for Construction at the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, or NIOSH. As part of the NORA Construction Sector Council, we're happy to be part of this second National Safety Stand Down to prevent struck-by injuries. The National Occupational Research Agenda, or NORA, is a partnership program to stimulate innovative research and improve workplace practices. I wanted to start by saying thanks to Brad Sant at ARTBA and Mike Mills with Liberty Mutual, who've been chairing our NORA Construction Sector Council work group and organize these events. I also want to say thank you to CPWR for hosting and OSHA for their collaboration. I'd also like to thank each of you for participating and for the work you do every day to prevent deaths and injuries to construction workers in work zones. Struck-by injuries are part of the Focus 4 hazards in construction. The Focus 4 hazards represent the cause of nearly 60% of all construction fatalities each year. That includes falls from elevation, struck-by incidents from vehicles, flying objects, caught in between, such as trench collapses and rollovers, and electrocutions. Preventing struck-by injuries to construction workers are a priority for NIOSH and for the NORA Construction Sector Council. We've received a lot of great questions during the registration process, and we'll hear responses to some of those early in the webinar. Following that, the panel will then spend some time answering live questions. We encourage you to submit those questions in the chat or Q&A box at any time. We probably won't get through all of them, but we'll be adding related resources to the main Struck by Hazards webpage on cpwr.com. Our panel today includes Brad Sant, Senior Vice President of Safety and Education, who's handling the moderation duties and Q&A. We also have Kevin Carnahan, who's a Regional Safety Manager at Granite Construction. Emmett Russell, who was Director of Safety, retired from the International Union of Operating Engineers, and Jacob Ladd, OSHA Wilmington Office Area Director. Again, thank you to all of you for joining us, and Brad, I'll hand it over to you to get started.
Well, thank you so much. It is exciting to be here at our second national stand-out on struck-by incidents. When we started these, our first one was a year ago, we didn't intend for them to all be virtual, but here we are, and it's allowed a lot more people to participate. So again, one of those good things that come out of COVID is that so many more can participate in these events when they are done virtually, and we'll use it as a model going forward. We have a wonderful panel with us today that'll tell actual stories and experiences they have had in preventing struck-by and experiencing struck-by incidents in work zones. And this will be kind of a real-world experience. But to get us started, I want to share with you a little bit of information that kind of sets the tone for why we're having a national stand down. And so we have to ask ourselves, when it comes to data, how big is our problem? And how do we know it? Well, we look at information, and this is on work zone crashes and work zone fatalities. So this is information provided by the Department of Transportation, specifically the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, who tracks all the accidents that happen on our national road system. And here we're seeing, sadly, that work zone accidents, work zone fatalities, work zone crashes have been on the rise. Matter of fact, since 2010 to 2019, the most recent year for which we have data, we have seen an increase of 44% in the number of work zone fatalities. Now, these are motorists, passengers, and workers, and others who may be pedestrians near the side of the road. So this includes not just worker fatalities, but anyone who dies in work zones. And again, we consider probably all these, whether they're work or not, as struck-by incidents or incidents involving a vehicle or people crashing. And so it all ties into why we're doing that. Now, if we look down specifically, now we're not looking just at everyone who may get injured or killed in a work zone, but the workers. Looking now at data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, an entirely different data set than we get from the Department of Transportation. It looks at just workers in the construction industry and how they are killed. And again, we're seeing a lot of up and down there, but generally a bit of an upward trend when it comes to struck by equipment or an object fatalities. Luckily, we're down a bit from where we were in 2018 when we spiked up to 113, but we're still at 90 And again, we'll see how our data coming this year, a slow creep upward. When we look at the struck by vehicle fatalities, again, pretty much up and down, but in more latter years, a slight upward creep. So we've got to really pay attention to this. Again, struck by injuries are the number one cause of injury in the construction, and struck by fatalities, number two, but it depends on your industry too. And we'll talk a little bit about that more in a minute. When we talk about the struck by an object and equipment for the non-fatal injuries, again, we peaked up in 2016. We had a nice downward trend. We still are just barely moving downward. So that's a good thing that our injuries are down. But again, don't let the word injuries make you think that it's someone who gets a little bit hurt and they're better. Many of these injuries last a lifetime and end careers. And so a significant problem continues with nearly 16,000 injuries in the construction sector alone. Okay, so we look at construction versus all industries. Between 2011 and 2016, 532 construction workers were killed at road construction sites. And that's more than double for all other industries. So again, we have a significant issue in the heavy and civil segment of the construction industry. And again, the highway, bridge, and street sector has the highest numbers of fatalities. So when it comes to struck by fatalities, the heavy and civil industry is our biggest worry for fatalities because they're usually being hit by cars intruding into the work zone or construction equipment. If we look at struck bys from other types of incidents, just as far as the highest number of injuries, again, we can look at some other sectors like plumbing, heating, air conditioning, and masonry. So what's happened during the pandemic, and again, in the work zone? Big problems, because we saw that during the spring of 2020, just a year ago, the travel on America's roadways dropped by 40%. That should have been really good news. As we saw less traffic volumes, we would expect less struck bys and less fatalities. However, what we had is a convolution of problems here because as the number of, or the amount of vehicles traveled, the vehicle miles traveled, as we drove less, state departments of transportation, roadway owners saw it as a great opportunity to advance construction work and get some projects done while there was less traffic, hoping that less traffic, less exposure, we can get more work done. But what we actually saw was fatal work zone fatalities increased during that period. And we're asking ourselves, why? Well, as the road emptied, speeds went up. Matter of fact, a study that was done in the Washington, D.C. area reported that some areas were clocked at over 130 miles per hour. There's an article in the Washington Post. Now, mind you, I don't know if this is in the wider D.C. area or within D.C. itself, but inside the District of Columbia, there's no posted speed limit higher than 45 miles per hour. And so we saw the deaths both by workers and motorists and their passengers increase during the 2019, even as our traffic decreased. So the one thing that we're still working on and will continue to work on is with the struck by in the work zone, is that we really need to get the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, that's the Department of Transportation agency that does all that work zone reporting, to correlate better with the Bureau of Labor Statistics because their systems don't match up. And a matter of fact, NHTSA classifies any person outside of a vehicle. So according to the NHTSA data, you're either a driver, you're a passenger, or you are a pedestrian. And so they lump all the workers that may be struck as a pedestrian. And that's a problem, especially when we're talking about with the agency, how to get less pedestrian fatalities. They're not thinking about workers. And so that's a challenge. And again, with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they are only tracking workers there. But sometimes the way they group workers is problematic and we're missing such. Because if we're just thinking of your traditional highway worker, we're probably capturing them, the laborers, operators, people that you anticipate being there doing construction work. But our industry is much bigger than that. And the BLS data, if you run just a simple analysis, you're not going to capture inspectors, engineers, surveyors, cleaning crews, people who are installing signs. All those are missed in the BLS, just doing a simple BLS search. And you can't really separate those categories to get just the transportation construction and sign installers versus others. So it's really hard to really know how many exactly are killed, and we're working to do that. So one of our efforts going on right now is to get better correlation and better data, getting NHTSA and BLS to work together and to continue that work. And so why that's important? Well, it's because in the heavy and civil industry, the struck by is our #1 cause of fatalities. In most construction, and we're next week or a couple of weeks, we're going to do our national stand down on falls. Critically important because that's the #1 cause of death in the construction industry in general. But in heavy and civil, it's not falls. That's #2. #1 cause is struck by. So it's a big issue for this segment. And who is doing it? Well, there's a lot of causes, but if it's us running up over our own workers, likely it's dump trucks, big blind spots, the motorists, intrusions coming in, distracted drivers, speeding, and fatigue. And you're going to hear a little bit about that from Kevin and the other presenters. So again, we're going to talk about today some proper traffic control, internal traffic control, looking at both inside and outside the work area to prevent those work zone fatalities and accidents. So let's turn it over to Kevin at Granite, who's going to talk to us about some instances that they suffered and have been dealing with since November of last year. So take it away, Kevin.
Thank you, Brad, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Carnahan. I'm the Regional Safety Manager with Granite Construction Company. I'm in the South Coast region of California. If you're familiar with Southern California, I'm in the San Diego, Orange County, LA area. Just would like to start out by saying thank you to Brad and ARTBA for allowing us to share this unfortunate incident with the group. Overall, our intention is to share details of our incident that we experienced in November with hopes of driving overall awareness of work zone intrusions and struck by incidents within the construction industry. So for those of you that don't know, Granite Construction's usual type of work consists of asphalt and concrete paving, dirt work, underground utilities, structural concrete, a lot of the times with materials that we mine and size in our aggregate mining facilities. So this project that we were on was no different than really the hundreds that we've been on before. On the night of November 18th, 2020, this is really what we were up against. This was the project scope. $10 million project with Caltrans. We had a rubberized hot mix asphalt paving project with electrical work, landscaping, concrete, flat work improvements. We were going to be doing both the eastbound and the westbound lanes as far as asphalt paving during the night shift from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. We were provided single lane freeway closures with on and off ramp closures. So really kind of our run of the mill asphalt paving project. So it's November 18th, 2020. You know, last year, end of last year, about 12:05 a.m. I got a phone call. I was sleeping at the time, and you know, as a safety manager, you get these calls. Sometimes they're you know, unfortunate calls. Sometimes it's a good call. At this time, it was not a good call. During the eastbound shoulder paving operation, a drowsy driver had entered our work zone, traveling about 60 miles an hour in a 45-mile-an-hour work zone. The driver had fallen asleep for about 3 seconds as she was rounding the gradual left turn radius, as you guys can see in this picture on the right. She struck multiple traffic cones and was about 2 feet from striking our asphalt roller. So she missed the asphalt roller and she ended up striking our asphalt laborer that was on the ground. His name's Emilio, displacing him over 50 feet from the initial impact location. This all happened within about 3 seconds time. After multiple attempts of chest compressions and other EMS services, Emilio was pronounced deceased about 30 minutes after the impact. So here you can see a general layout of our project site. If you've ever driven in San Diego area or Los Angeles area, you understand that the freeway system is pretty complex. It's very fast moving. a lot of very aggressive drivers that do like to, disregard sometimes the traffic laws. So that's exactly what we saw here. This project is located on the eastbound Highway 94 in Spring Valley, California. If you're familiar with San Diego, that's East County, San Diego. Very complex freeway system with a lot of speeding vehicles. As you can see in the diagram, our asphalt paving spread and our lane closure that we had set up were all per specification, and overall production was very high the night that Emilio got struck. You can see the curvature of the road here, and that white line that's kind of towards the center of the screen there, that shows the travel path of the fatigued driver. So right just about underneath the Avocado Boulevard overcrossing is whenever it was believed that she fell asleep, and then she followed a similar straight path, just missing our initial breakdown compaction asphalt roller by about 2 feet, and then ended up striking Emilio right on the edge of the shoulder that we were paving. So he was actually about 10 feet inside of the cone line whenever he was struck. So once Emilio was struck, obviously the third-party driver woke up. She overcorrected over to the left. You can see the travel path ending up next to our shuttle buggy for the paving operation. So I wanted to share some photos of, this is obviously a super tragic incident that we went through, but part of this is the incident investigation that has to happen after this to find out, who, what, when, where, why, and what we need to do moving forward. So pictured here, you see California Highway Patrol investigating the Highway 94 incident. This section of the freeway after the incident was shut down for about 10 hours as Granite and the Highway Patrol completed incident investigations. Towards the center of the screen, you see the high visibility hard hat, which that was Emilio's. That ended up getting placed there after he was struck. Emilio's body ended up quite a ways in front of that as he was thrown about 50 to 60 feet after impact. Some more photos here. This gives a general perspective of the job, but the fatigued driver that struck Emilio just missed this breakdown roller that you see here towards the center of the screen by about 2 feet. 1 or 2 seconds difference, and this incident could have been completely different, for better or for worse. It could have possibly resulted in injury to the driver. It could have resulted in more injury or possibly more death to the rest of our paving crew that was out there. There's about 10 guys that are behind that paver at one time. So this incident investigation lasted a while, as you can imagine, and this shows really the severity of the damage to the two-door vehicle that struck Emilio. The overall incident investigation lasted for about 10 hours, going well into daylight hours, as you see here. Employees were interviewed and counseled, and hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures were taken, as well as 3D imaging on the job site. The small two-door vehicle that struck Emilio is seen here with the large hole in the windshield, and that hole is where Emilio's head went through when he was struck. You can see the impact that Emilio's body caused on that vehicle. The vehicle was totaled, and the driver of the vehicle ended up walking away from that not injured whatsoever. So here's more or less a back view of the incident. Emilio ended up landing next to our shuttle buggy, which is that machine kind of on the top left with the conveyor. So he was struck well before that, and then you can actually see his asphalt rake next to the shuttle buggy. So all of this material just displaced all over the place can really tell you the severity of that impact and what our paving crew, saw with their own eyes. They saw their friend get struck and hit, and chest compressions and multiple types of emergency medical services tried to perform on Emilio, but was not successful. So what do you take away from an incident like this? That's what, you know, our team was asking them ourselves the day of the incident, and really everybody's just in shock. Nobody can believe this happened to their friend, their coworker. This was my first fatality dealing within the safety profession, and it's a big deal. It's huge. But what can my team and what can your team do to prevent incidents like this from happening? And this is, you know, this is just scratching the surface, but something that I thought is worth sharing. The unchanging fact about our work in heavy civil construction is that working around live traffic is extremely dangerous, no matter how many years of experience you have. There are many tools and methods to help prevent work zone intrusion, so and that's part of what I want to go over here. First, you really need to look at your overall exposure to live traffic and your traffic control setup, right? I've noted here is the MUTCD enough, what you have? Just because you have something per spec doesn't mean it's enough. So are you meeting the MUTCD traffic control standard, or can you go above and beyond that standard to protect your people? Next, you're looking at your highway patrol support. On a lot of these freeway jobs that we do, a lot of these active highway jobs, we do get the luxury of having highway patrol out on the job, at least stationed on the job. And really what you're looking for is active enforcement of these highway patrolmen that are out there. But you got to look at the quality, right? Are the highway patrolmen and women actively enforcing, or are they just sleeping in their duty vehicles, which is the case a lot of the time. Multiple highway patrol vehicles actively enforcing your work zone make a world of difference. If somebody's speeding through and they go and get a ticket, that sends a message to the rest of the drivers in the area. We go over to the leading indicator analysis. Are you tracking leading safety indicators on your projects and actively communicating them to the team involved? So this could be negative, positive observations. How's the culture on the job? Is the team proactively taking care of safety issues on the job? These are things that you can sense before an incident happens. You get into near miss reporting. Have there been any near misses on the project? Have there been any prior work zone intrusions noted, and how can we adjust our work setup to prevent future incidents? And then again, this goes back to communication. Is this all being communicated to the project team and to the owner, right? Because ultimately Caltrans wants a successful, safe project, and communicating that you're having issues out in the field that are outside of your control are huge. And a lot of the time they can help with that. Then lastly, we're talking about emergency procedure training. If there is a work zone intrusion, does your team know how to effectively respond to that work zone intrusion? Do you have equipment that's outfitted with alarm systems or technology that makes other people aware that there's been an intrusion? This incident, there was 3 seconds between the first cone being hit and striking Amelia. What could have been done within those 3 seconds? Do all of the team members that are out there, and we're getting a lot of new craft employees out in the field, do they all understand their exit routes if there was a work zone intrusion? These are all items to consider as anybody, you know, on this call is working on any operation near an active roadway. So the work must go on, right? I mean, we're all here to make money, run profitable, safe business. So I thought it would be worth mentioning where we're at currently with the Highway 94 project. So all asphalt paving had been delayed up until last week, actually. So this was almost a 6-month delay due to the investigation and also weather temperatures for paving. Believe it or not, it does drop below 50 degrees in San Diego. So there are still about 30 shifts of asphalt paving to be completed until the project is finished. So we're getting started there, and we should be on a good track here moving forward. Additionally, there have been many site safety negotiations with Caltrans, and Caltrans has been great in working through this. So there's been discussions of full freeway closures, increased active highway patrol presence during our paving shifts, lowering speed limits through the work zone with addition of roadway rumble strips, transfer from traffic cones 2 barrels for lane closures. We live in the state of California, and traffic cones are still a thing over here and in our MUTCD spec. We're also talking about the means and methods of worker exposure, as far as limiting asphalt raking by alternate paving methods, alternate rolling methods, and also work zone intrusion alert technology. So Caltrans ultimately agreed to allowing full freeway closures on this project with up to 4 highway patrolmen actively enforcing the work zone. Cars will be directed off of the freeway into the nearby county roads, as we basically have the entire freeway to do our work closed to traffic. This really was the ideal option for Granite in terms of safety and production purposes. So it's worth noting the business impacts that this fatality has. I mean, first and foremost, the loss of life is incredibly difficult to deal with on a professional and personal level. The loss of life has to be dealt with great care and respect. The additional business costs that we've seen with this, just the night of the incident, nearly $150,000 cost impact just from the fatality due to production and investigation costs, and over $500,000 initially paid out in workers' compensation death benefits to Emilio's family. Legal costs are still to be determined at this time. Given the impact and the loss of life here, it is really important that the numbers don't take the lead in something like this. But ultimately, like I said, we're all here to run profitable, safe business. So we thought, understanding the business element is something we thought would be necessary to share here. Again, I just wanted to say thank you to ARTBA and Brad Sant specifically for recognizing this important issue and the need for awareness within all of our work zones, within work zone intrusions, struck by incidents. If anybody has any questions or would like to follow up with me specifically, please feel free to reach out to me or Brad Sant. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And folks, I see a few questions starting to come in. If possible, we'll hold those questions till the end and we'll invite all of our 3 panelists back to address them. So thank you so much, Kevin, and for that fantastic story. I shouldn't say fantastic, but the information that it conveys and the seriousness of the work that we do, and also what you've done to make some changes. And I think we'll hear similar stuff now from Emmett Russell. He'll talk about a similar incident, but one that happened with construction equipment as opposed to an intrusion. So please take it away, Emmett.
And today I'd like to talk about a backover incident. We were in Texas teaching, myself and my partner, Gary Four, was in Texas teaching runovers and backovers for the Texas DOT in one of their regions. Let me describe the incident. It was a asphalt spreading operation where we had the asphalt spreader and we actually had 2 rollers or compactors following the spreader, compacting the asphalt. Also, we had the paving crew. Now, based on the training we had done a lot of training in terms of how to keep workers on foot safe. But let me describe what actually happened. One of the 2 roller operators, one of the operators needed to do a relief break. He needed to go to the woods to relieve himself. And in doing so, he actually stopped his machine. And to get to the woods, he had to cross the path of the second compactor. Instead of notifying the second compactor what he was intending to do, he literally tried to outrun the machine. And the second compactor operator, in terms of the path he was working, obviously he did a short path for whatever reason. And the second operator literally walked to the operator's back. Now, interesting with the compactors and rollers, they're not that blind. Matter of fact, the sight lines for the operator is very good, but to this operator's disadvantage, he was at the operator's back and the operator did not see him. Second thing with compactors and rollers, there's very little hesitation between forward and reverse. In other words, they go back and forth compacting the asphalt, and there's almost no hesitation between forward and reverse. So when the second operator tried to get to the woods, he tried to literally outrun or outmaneuver the machine, was not successful in doing so, and actually got rolled over. Now, let me discuss just a little bit what we were teaching. We were teaching that the area where the paver and the compactors work is actually a worker-free zone. In other words, no worker on foot should even be in this area. And to a big degree, workers were treating it as a worker-free zone. But unfortunately, you don't consider the operators as part of who you are making that big emphasis with in that worker-free zone. Also, we were teaching about the safety circle around machines and around equipment. In other words, you got the space on the ground that the machine is actually traveling. You consider any overhead issues, you consider any underground issues, and basically we were teaching that as well. And then also, we were making a big emphasis for workers on foot to make sure that they stayed out of the zones that were not safe. In this case, the operator stopping. Now, what we started teaching after this incident was that operators and workers on foot, if you need to go anywhere in the path of an operator, you got to wave your hand. Don't try to outrun the machine. Don't try to outmaneuver a machine. Wave your hand, get the operator's attention. When you get the operator's attention, you got to let the operator now know what your intent is. And before you move, you got to get a definite signal or response from the operator still operating the machine. And typically that operator will actually stop and give you a chance to safely get from point A to point B. So this was a very unfortunate incident, and this happened literally in the middle. We were training over an 8-week period, and this incident happened in between our training sessions. And some of what concerned us was the fact that here you had an equipment operator, and you would think that that equipment operator would be a really good communicator with other equipment operators, and that was not the case. So we literally had to expand our training where equipment operators, when you become a worker on foot, now you had to really pay very close attention to all of the things, the training we were giving to workers on foot. One of the things that we did after this was we talked to the Texas DOT about, again, making sure that we taught folks how to get operators' attention, let operators know what you wanted to do, that you needed to actually come into this worker-free zone. And also, as a result of that, we now talk about the fact that we have to use technology where we can to assist us. And also, whenever there is a near miss or an incident, now we have to actually use the lessons learned as a toolbox talk or use it in a training session so that we can actually heighten the awareness of all of the workers working in the crews, in this case, for Texas DOT. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Emmett. Just one point perhaps, and I know this will probably come up in the Q&A, but you were talking a little bit about moving your hands and getting the attention of an operator ever before it's entering the worker-free zone. What kind of a signal does someone doing that expect back from the operator to know that the operator actually saw him, to acknowledge that signal?
Well, the clear thing is the operator has to give a clear signal of either stop, hold up, or now you can actually come and do what you need to do. But clearly, we will give the instructions to the worker on foot to get the operator's attention. And then we teach the operator, never just shake your head, because sometimes a head shake can be misrecognized. But again, hold up your hand for the operator to clearly wait, or now you can actually come and I will be watching you cross the path of my machine.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Emmett. And again, a couple of questions come in, but again, we'll hold these for the end so we can kind of have a cross dialogue with all the presenters. So next, we're excited to hear from Jacob Ladd, who's one of the OSHA's experts on work zones with a lot of great experience with some of the innovative things they have done and continue to do in New Jersey before moving over to the Region 3 area office in Delaware. So please take it away, Jacob.
Thank you very much. I don't know that I would call myself an expert, but we have tried to understand this as best as we can. So I've worked as part of a team, and several of the folks that are on that team are actually listening into this call. And we've spent a lot of time trying to make sure that we have a good handle on this and we're able to use it in the field for enforcement purposes and also for outreach to try to prevent the enforcement purposes later. So there's been quite a bit of good comments already, and a lot of what I'm going to talk about is kind of echoing a lot of that, but maybe expanding on some of it as well. We also here at OSHA see struck by incidents accounting for most of the OSHA investigations that are related to work zones. And most of these we find are related to backovers and internal struck by situations, internal equipment. Often there are opportunities to improve the worker safety element of a project. And smaller projects don't always have the same level of planning and oversight. So, we see quite a bit of opportunity to improve worker safety because we see all manner of work zone types. So, we get very focused on heavy highway work zone projects, but here today, I want to talk a little bit about some other types of operations as well. Typically on larger projects, there's compliance.
Jacob, sorry to interrupt, but you're not sharing your screen. I'm not sure if you meant to be yet.
Is that better? Can you see now?
Yes.
Okay. That's my first slide, just for reference. Okay. So on larger projects, we see compliance with traffic control plans, and a lot of work and effort goes into traffic control planning, especially when you are talking about federal or state-funded projects. With this, as was alluded to previously, typically the MUTCD, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, is the major document that people are using in conjunction with state supplements to accomplish their traffic control planning. And on smaller jobs, a lot of times it comes down to the experience, knowledge of the competent person. And also with that, their exposure and their frame of mind and their, ability to make decisions within the company, or how they feel about that, what their impression of their ability to make those decisions is. So there's some challenges to compliance. Traffic management is generally the major concern of larger projects. So on federal or state-funded big highway projects, we're primarily, a lot of times is spent on moving the motorists through the project. And especially in long-term projects, we find that once we have closed off a project and separated it by barrier from the moving motorist on the other side of that, there's less thought given to the inside of the work zone. Pedestrian considerations are often lacking as well and don't include workers. Time and conditions often begin to dictate the operation. So people get behind schedule, or something changes in the schedule and they have to make accommodation to fix that or make up for it. And so that begins to dictate how the operation proceeds. Number of workers, delays in schedule, those kinds of things. There's a lot of use of emergency work that happens, what people like to term as emergency work. We have to get this done right now, immediately. And that changes the plan oftentimes, we see. And there's a reliance on law enforcement and other temporary interruptions. And what I mean by that is we find that oftentimes there's a feeling that, oh, I put a law enforcement officer out there and I'm protected. And that's not the case. They do serve as a deterrent and they're helpful, but they're not, they're not going to prevent all incidents. We also alter the plan when we have temporary interruptions. To give you an example of this, maybe a delivery got rerouted for some reason, and now we have to get it into the work zone differently than we planned initially, and so we throw flaggers out there, and we decide to do, to turn it through traffic into oncoming traffic and into the project, that type of thing. So we tend to plan, we tend to plan for the motorist, but what I would encourage is to plan for smooth operation when you're thinking about the motorist. So, there's what's compliant, meaning the minimum number of signs and the minimum number of spacing and all that. And then there's what it makes sense for somebody who's driving through the project. And a lot of times we find that people don't, haven't driven through their project or don't understand how it looks to somebody who's coming into it or driving through it. So it's something to consider while you're setting these things up. Plan with smooth motorist operation in mind. And then something to consider is to perform a separate assessment of internal operations for worker safety. Again, a lot of these documents are very focused on managing traffic through the project. A lot of them have elements of worker safety, but don't focus on worker safety. So, a good thing that you can do is have a separate assessment and assess the internal operation for worker safety. Use multiple sources. So the MUTCD is fine. That's going to be your minimum document. But use your state supplement, use the ANSI standards that exist, use other documents if they are available that are applicable. They will help you to plan a project that's safe for your workers and manages your traffic appropriately. And think of the should statements as a test. So one of the major things that we find in the enforcement arena is people say, well, it's a should, it's an advisement of what I should do. It doesn't mean that I have to do it. And that's perfectly acceptable in terms of what you need to do for compliance, but think of it as a test. I would encourage you to think of it as a test. What is your reason for not doing it? Do you have a good reason for not doing it? It's recommending that you do it for good reason. So if you don't have a good reason for not doing it, maybe you should reconsider whether you should or not. This is a consolidated table, and it's not all inclusive, but it does cover the major areas. So again, some things to think about here. We get very hung up on heavy highway type work, but work zones can appear all over, in suburban areas, in agricultural areas, off the beaten path, and all different types of workers can be exposed to these different hazards. So what you have here is a table that kind of looks at how you can comply. So in 1910, you're going to find more in the maintenance and utility type work. Whereas in 1926, our construction standard, you see that there's elements under 200 and 201 that basically incorporate by reference the NMTCD. In addition to those, there are other standards. This is not an all-inclusive list that might apply. For instance, earth-moving equipment or motor vehicle standard. However, for the traffic elements, these are the standards that are going to apply. Other places, standards don't exist for OSHA, and we have to use the general duty clause, section 5A1. And in that case, we're going to base that primarily on consensus standards. So in this case, we're primarily talking about ANSI standards. And much of what occurs out there will fall into one of these four. There are others, but these are the four, with the last two listed in the table being the bulk of it. You know, the first two are really kind of arboricultural and landscaping operations that you might run into, but the bulk of what goes out on a road is going to fall into one of those two ANSI standards. And again, it's not a complete, you know, list, but it is a good idea of where you can look for compliance assistance. There are many more shall statements in these documents. Consensus standards will help you plan your job. They will help you think about your job. There's an expanded discussion on hazard analysis. So it kind of makes you think about it in terms of, you know, if this, then that. It gives you a process to follow. And it says, well, if there's this condition, maybe consider these 5 things. And if you work through that and think about, you know, again, like I said, a should, you know, what is your reason for not doing it? That will help you to make sure that you have reliable protections in place for your workers. And the other thing I would say with that is don't let that be a hurdle. So you may have a situation where you feel you can't do something because of the phase of the construction project. Well, that's okay. Is there an alternate way that you might be able to do it? And these ANSI documents will help you to do that. And again, there's a focus on job hazard analysis planning and most importantly, what we see, internal traffic control planning. It's an element that's lacking very often. Some things to think about when you're talking about internal traffic controls. Backing. Backing is the #1 thing that you should be thinking about. If it is at all possible, you should ideally come up with a plan that you don't have to back. If you can move people in a forward direction through your project only, that's likely going to result in the least amount of issues between different contractors, foot workers, and heavy equipment, and all the other things that you might find in a work zone. Parking is a concern, and it's not only just parking of the equipment related to the work zone, but also people who pull in with their personal vehicles. Maybe you have a foreman who bounces around to a couple projects and you know, for whatever reason, he doesn't take the work truck that night, he takes his own truck. Or even a worker on a smaller job who stops in to do some quick work. Those vehicles are not always equipped the same way as a work truck might be. So they might not have all of the reflective striping and the rotating beacon light and all that. Those are concerns. And without providing an area that's safe to park and access the site, that's what workers will do. Same thing goes with workers who are pedestrians. There are many times when we see a project that's adjacent to a parking lot. So you have a 4-lane highway and there's a hotel that's parked across the street from where the guys are working. So the expectation is that they pull into the hotel parking lot, park their vehicle, and walk across the street. They're pedestrians. We need to make consideration for how we're going to get them across the street. Or alternatively, make an entry and exit plan into and out of the work zone and allow them a space to park there. That would be a better option. Use of spotters. Spotters are a great tool, and we certainly would encourage them. There's a lot of things that go along with that, making sure that they have the right gear. There's a communication plan. So, you know, Emmett was talking about waving and making positive contact with an operator, and that's great. I would expand on that and say, use of a radio, or have a, a common comm channel or something is even better if you can do that. But, there's a lot that goes into it, but using spotters and making sure that things are backed only under very controlled conditions is much, much safer. And appropriate use of flaggers and other emergency controls. There is a place for both law enforcement and for proper use of flaggers. But we need to make sure that we're setting them up correctly. Flaggers have appropriate equipment and training. They know where they're supposed to be. It's not last minute. They have a flagger station set up appropriately. And if it's an emergency, if it is truly an emergency situation, there are, ways to do that, including law enforcement. But what is thought of as an emergency situation should be very limited. Many times we'll be out and we'll talk to a company who we find, and they're very quick to say this is emergency work. However, we find that they've been planning it for a week or even longer sometimes. So we need to really think about what is truly emergency work. So I have a couple of examples, and I don't want to go too far into the weeds with this, but they kind of highlight the point. So here is a kind of a rough diagram of an incident that occurred. It was a fatality. And what happened here was it was a paving operation, and as you can see, there was backing that occurred. What is something that may not be something that people think about is the person who was struck was actually operating a skid steer, and the window on the skid steer got blocked by dust and whatever else. And they pulled over to clean their window, and there wasn't like a maintenance area, or there was no thought given to places where it would be safe for somebody to park and take a break and either do maintenance or inspection or clean things up. And while this person was out of their skid steer, another vehicle backed and struck them and crushed them between the two vehicles. Now, on the right side here, I have some things in green, and what those are to highlight is how the company thought that they were protecting their employees, and they are good concepts. They just need a little expansion here. So you have the fact that they have their safety devices, and they were all present, and they were installed. There was a backup alarm that was installed on the vehicles, and vehicles have a pre-use checklist. And there's even a behavioral safety checklist for the employees that are working on the project that night. But it was paving at midnight, and there was no illumination. A truck that had not been used in a long time was used because the other one had an issue, and so this spare was out there, and they decided to put it in service. Unfortunately, the backup alarm that was present wasn't hooked up. One of the wires had backed off and wasn't engaging. And it's not part of a pre-use, it wasn't part of a pre-use checklist. So nothing was caught in terms of the backup alarm not working. And again, with cleaning the skid steer window, the back, there's an employee there between two vehicles. There's no spotter used. There was no plan of communication. There was no preset methodology on how these things were going to operate. It just was that they were going to back and pull out, and it wasn't controlled or coordinated in any way. And it just so happened that this guy needed to clean his window at the time and ended up in an unfortunate position. The second example that I have is another project on a highway, and you had two companies. One was an inspector, and the other was the site work contractor who was doing, who had a foreman out there talking to one of his crews. Now, this happened in broad daylight, and there was even a backup camera installed on the vehicle. And there's a video of this that is an extremely compelling video. And you can see that the person operating the vehicle was actually looking around and looking in their mirrors for whatever reason, distractions going on, whether that's the highway on the side or other equipment moving within the project, they didn't see the person standing behind them. So at some point, the inspector had walked behind the truck, and the person for the site contractor had backed up and struck the inspector. Some things to think about: there was no internal traffic control plan here. There was no exit plan, but there was space to. So they're backing the vehicle where it was unnecessary. There wasn't any coordination between the companies. You know, I'm going to be here, I need to do this work today. I'm going to be here, I need to do this work today. Okay, we're going to have vehicles in and out at this time. None of that existed. And of course, obviously there was no spotter. So, you know, to highlight some things here, you know, there's some commonalities between the two examples. And I'm not saying that anything that the companies did to prevent some of this is bad, but it's something that we need to think about. As we get more technology into vehicles, maybe we need to have a more aggressive maintenance and inspection program. Maybe we need to rethink how we do those things. You know, communication methods need to be thought about. Illumination, you know, would have played a big part here in the paving incident. And, you know, those are things that all exist under the ANSI standards. And some, to some degree, exist in some discussion under the METCD as well, or some of the state supplements. But, you know, there's, you know, much more to think about. And as was, you know, mentioned before, injuries, you know, even if it's not a fatality, injuries are life altering, excuse me. So with that being said, you know, just it's OSHA's 50th anniversary, and we have our Worker Memorial Day event on the 28th. And you can go to the OSHA webpage to find out more information about that. But you know, we take this very seriously, and I would encourage you to seek out. Every state has a local technical assistance program. And I would encourage everyone to seek out those resources to assist you with training and planning and having a successful job. And that's all I have.
Thanks so much, Jacob. Really appreciate that. And again, your presentations have elicited a few questions. So let's start this one, and I'll direct this one to you initially, Emmett, but again, anyone feel free to jump in. We've had some questions about the use of spotters. Is it always appropriate to do spotters? Are there times when they're not? I mean, let's talk about spotters as a part of avoiding incidents within the work zone.
In the case of the fatality I described, spotters would not have actually been the solution. We incorporated the worker-free zone where workers were not supposed to be. This was just a pure lack of communication between the two operators. Always remember one thing with spotters. Number one is the spotter has to be trained. And if the spotter's not trained, now you have another body on the job that might be susceptible to an issue or an incident. And secondly is the spotter only really works where you have a lot of backing up, and where you have backing up and you have hazards, a spotter is very necessary, but a spotter does not necessarily take care of every issue on the job site.
Do either of our other panelists have a thought or position on the thought of using spotters? What about this one, just to expand it? Can a spotter and a flagger be the same person?
No, flagger requires specialized training. And matter of fact, in most states, a flagger actually has to take a specific class and actually qualify for flagging. A spotter can actually be trained per on the job. And let me say the other thing about a spotter. A spotter literally has to know the equipment, has to know the operator, has to know workers on foot, has to really know the operation. And on a typical award zone, what they do is they take the least experienced person and make that person a spotter. And that's probably one of the most dangerous things you can do. A spotter really needs to be trained and really needs to have a fair amount of experience to be successful in terms of maintaining safety on the job.
Jacob, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would echo that, but I would also expand that to the flagger. There are many times when we see people who are inexperienced who are put out as flaggers. Now, I'm not talking about flagging companies or larger jobs. Oftentimes, it's a position that exists and maybe even a separate contract that exists. But especially on smaller jobs or emergency work, there's somebody who's thrown out there and their expectation is, go out there and do flagging. We also see this a lot with natural disasters. There's never enough workers. There's always too much going on. And whoever is there and handy, gets thrown out and, hey, go control traffic. Whether that's foot traffic as a spotter or it's a vehicle traffic as a flagger, either way, it's a disservice to these folks, both the people who they're trying to control and the person who's trying to control them. Could be placed in that situation where they don't have a full understanding of the concepts, potentially not well equipped, which we see quite often, and in a hurried environment. So I think that absolutely, it's critical that you have people who have appropriate training and equipment to do the flagging, and spotters. I mean, the communication method is absolutely critical.
Perfect, thank you. And again, just a couple of things I would add to that with the question of spotters and flaggers is they have two completely different jobs. The flagger is focused on the traffic moving by, the spotter on the equipment. They can't really do that at the same time. They got to be separate jobs. And then the other point is, Emmett kind of alluded to this as well with spotter signaling. I think the new 81048 standard, work zone standard, 81047, has a new, the one that's coming out does have some standardized signaling. And again, the idea is that you got to make sure that there's some kind of standardized set of signals so that the operator and the spotter know what they're talking about and understand what each other is saying. And so some work is underway there. Jacob, let's direct this back to you because I've had a couple of questions come in both in advance of this and now. I'm really talking about utility work and this struck by issue. A question came in about what do you advise when you have manholes in the middle of the road? And just, how do you work with, how can maybe the construction sector work better with the public services sector to raise this issue? Because we have a lot of the same thing and sanitation workers are hugely exposed for these struck by.
So it's a difficult problem. We find that as you probably, many people in the crowd probably have heard before, public information campaigns related to utility work is very helpful. If the public is aware that utility work is going to be going on, that's very helpful in terms of recognizing that all of a sudden the big orange sign means that they got to watch out for people. It's also something that they need to put a lot of thought into and timing. Is it better to do that work at night? Is it better to do it during the day? How can we effectively manage the traffic? What is the locale that we're working at? All those things matter quite a bit. Effective use of detours, appropriate use of flaggers, increased protections for the worker in terms of and I mean, physical protections, truck mounted attenuators of some kind, barrier where it's, appropriate, depending on the scope of the utility work, are all very helpful. What I will say is we have a lot of utility work that we see that occurs where, they go out and they tend to think of themselves as a very minimal impact on traffic and how it moves. And, they say, well, we're a mobile operation and we're only out here for a few minutes and we need to do this real quick. And, it's just not the case. even 15 minutes out on a roadway of a closure can back traffic up quite a bit, or, you know, cause frustrated motorists, or, you know, we have a lot of devices in our life these days, whether that's, you know, a handheld device or it's your screen in your car. People are not paying quite as much attention as they used to driving. You know, you got to make yourself as visible as possible, set yourself up for success, and really look at the project and think through it first before placing. And I would say that that's another hallmark of good you know, worker protection that we see neglected quite often. People are placed into the job to accomplish the job prior to the devices and everything else that needed to control the traffic being placed out there first.
Thank you. And one kind of final question, again, and folks, I'm sorry we don't have time. We're already over time. There's a lot of good questions, some information on statistics. Jessica's going to come on in just a few minutes and tell you about how you can get to this information and a lot of other struck by information that we have developed for this stand down on CPWR sites. Earlier today, there was a presentation on the lift zone, so struck by incidents with cranes. And the information on that, on this and others is all going to be available. And some of the statistics some of you have asked about is there. But just kind of as a wrap up, let's jump to you, Kevin. A couple of questions really regarding the involvement of the California Highway Patrol and how they were interacting on your job site. Maybe you can make that a little broader of interest, but any ways in working with the state police or tips that you have learned as a result of your incident and others?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So initially on this project, on the Highway 94 job, we were designated with one, sometimes two, what we call co-zeep units out on the job. And they were deemed to rove the job as we were working. What we found was there was an initial rove in the beginning of the job, but then as these guys, a lot of these highway patrolmen are working double shifts, they're tired, and that seems to affect their effectiveness. So a lot of the times, you know, we would find them, you know, maybe not being the most effective as far as roving the job or tracking down motorists that are going down the freeway. So a lot of that is partnership with the DOT and letting them know that is going on. You know, sometimes you know, they assume everything is good, but if there's no communication telling them otherwise, you know, they're not going to act on it. So we've also incorporated CHP officers into our initial safety meetings in the morning. We call them take fives, to let them know our work limits, where they would be the most effective, and really just making a partnership with them to make them a part of the crew.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and there are some good questions here. I'd love to have some time to address, and maybe we can save that for our next stand down, because with more and more states increasing legal use of marijuana, recreational use, and all the other distracted driving problems we've had, you know, great questions are being raised about how is this impacting our jobs and even our workers where that's legal, and how do you drug test? So there's a lot of issues with struck by that we could dive into that we just don't have time. But for all the information that we do have, Jessica, would you come back on and kind of wrap us up and share with the folks how they can get to the information, the slides we've shared today, and a lot more information. And thank you so much, everyone, for participating. We've loved having you here.
So I just wanted to real quick, I just dropped the Struck by Hazards page in the chat, but wanted to show everyone really quickly that we have a number of resources on this page. So up at the top was about the events that we had today. I will post the recording to both events along with PDFs of the slides and additional resources up here so you can watch them afterward. We do have the option to get a certificate of participation for everyone who joined today, or for activities or events you're holding with your workers. And then if you scroll down, we have a number of resources that were created in support of this effort. both from last year on work zone safety and this year on lift zone safety. There's also the newest data bulletin there. But I just wanted to point out that we also have a ton of other resources from ARTBA and NIOSH and other organizations on an additional page. So you'll want to scroll all the way down to the bottom and check that out. There are a bunch of new FACE reports from NIOSH on there about incidents that have happened and other things like that, videos, etc. So thank you again, everyone, for joining, and look for a follow-up email from myself or Tyler Simpson here at CPWR either later this week or early next week. We'll be sending that out. So thanks, Brad, for putting this together. And thank you to Kevin, Jacob, and Emmett for all the great information you shared.
Can I close by, Brad, can I close by telling people you can go to ARTBA, American Road Transportation Builders website, and they offer a lot of training that would be good for a lot of companies who might not be sure what to do. And specifically, the training on preventing runovers and backovers is extremely excellent. So again, be aware that ARTBA's website can actually be an excellent source for you to actually get in-person training for your workers. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.